Hello, this is Mr. Hotchkiss. This article here is a, an article from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and it is the first article that you're going to take a look at. It's quite long, so I'm going to read the first 10 pages right here, and then I'm going to make another file. It's 20 pages long, so I'll do 10 pages and 10 pages. You may only have to focus on the second 10 pages, but I encourage you to listen to the whole thing because I think it's going to be useful. All right, so the labor unit that we're working on is dealing with uh, basically the growth of labor unions and things like that. Well, one of the problems is that farm workers don't necessarily get the option of creating unions. You may hear about I don't know, a person named Cesar Chavez who was working with the United Farm Workers, tried to create unions. I believe he did finally get one created, but there's still a lot of loopholes, still a lot of problems. This article here is a rather recent one. I believe it's from 2019. Um, and it talks about the growing dangers of pesticides and heat. And when we look at this word heat, I mean, really keep that in mind that heat is something that is starting to be more of a problem, especially in some of those places where they're making food. And it is all due to climate change. Pesticides, we use pesticides and have been using them since shortly before World War II or around World War II. And the people who are getting most exposed are those farm workers. All right, so let's take a look at the highlights. I'm going to start right here on highlights. Okay. The estimated 2.4 million farm workers in the United States are vital to U.S. food production. However, these workers are exploited, undervalued, and vulnerable to compounding climate change threats. The Union of Concerned Scientists assessed how pesticide exposure and heat stress conditions combine to present significant risks to farm workers' health and safety. We focused on California, Florida, and Washington, states that lead the nation in pesticide use, farm workers, and production of labor-intensive fruit, nuts, and vegetables. We found that farm workers in these states already experience substantial threats and that these are likely escalating. Policies to protect farm workers' well-being from the dangerous consequences of extreme heat and pesticide are urgently needed. All right, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so you can see better. And I'm going to then slide this over here a little bit. All right, so we're going to start reading through the introduction. Okay. Farm workers are vital to the agricultural system that brings food to dinner tables in the United States every day. Some 2.4 million workers provide 2/3 of all labor in U.S. agriculture, producing and packaging crop and livestock products. Despite this, they remain largely invisible to many. Distinct from farmers, farm workers do not typically own or operate farm businesses, nor do they own or rent the land. They perform difficult and dangerous work for insufficient wages and with few legal protections. At best, their labor is undervalued, and at worst, they are brutally exploited. And now their work is becoming even more hazardous as a result of climate change. Weather extremes associated with climate change are creating increasingly uncertain and life-threatening work conditions. Rising summer and winter temperatures and shifting rainfall patterns alter the timing and length of growing seasons. Extreme heat is becoming more common and deadly, and expanding pest activity may increase the likelihood of farmers' exposure to dangerous pesticides. In this report, we examine U.S. farm workers' vulnerability to compounding climate change threats due to the nature of their work and their social and political standing. Farm workers harvest strawberries in California. Such work is often done under grueling conditions, elevating the likelihood of injury from pesticide exposure and heat stress, among other hazards. Page 2. We focus on two threats: pesticide exposure and heat stress conditions, and explore how these are affecting U.S. farm workers' health and safety as climate change takes hold. This report provides recommendations for action at both the state and federal levels to protect the most vulnerable workers now. It also urges bold policy measures to create resilient, regenerative farming systems that are less reliant on pesticides, along with swift action to reduce the nation's heat-trapping emissions in order to begin limiting and reversing climate change for the long term. Farm workers are undervalued and highly vulnerable. Farm workers often conduct their work under grueling conditions, putting their health and safety at risk. While mechanization has reduced the role of farm labor for grain production, other parts of the agricultural sector remain labor intensive. The food system relies heavily on farm workers for the production of berries and other fruits, dairy products, tree crops, and vegetables, and to manage livestock. Top of this page here. Multiple forms of disenfranchisement enabled the food system's reliance on cheap, exploited labor. So what that means, that's a pretty big sentence there. Basically, we're exploiting people who don't have a choice and they can't really fight for themselves. So this is that disenfranchisement. It enables our reliance. Our food system relies on this cheap, exploited, or exploitable labor, which unfortunately tends to be low-income black and brown people. The U.S. farm labor market heavily depends on immigrants and seasonal guest workers to fill jobs that domestic workers generally find undesirable. In 2015 and 2016, only 24% of U.S. farm workers were born in the United States, and 3/4 were people of color. Farm workers leave their countries to do jobs that most U.S. citizens will not do, to earn an average of $10.80 per hour. The National Agricultural Workers Survey found that only 32% of farm workers reported a personal annual income of $30,000 or more. It's only 32%. Farm workers are typically hired by farmers, or in many cases, by contractors who coordinate labor for farmers and act as intermediaries between farmers and farm workers. The use of farm labor contractors can insulate farmers from charges of hiring undocumented workers and creates a situation ripe for abuse. Economic hardship, immigration status, spoken language, national origin, race, socioeconomic status, and other issues all contribute to farm workers being the targets of systemic exploitation and exclusion. Down here, cultural differences, lack of transportation, language barriers, and physical isolation in work camps all combine to create many obstacles that keep farm workers from accessing whatever scarce resources and services may be available. More fundamentally, lack of legal protection and political and socioeconomic power limits farm workers' ability to seek redress for abuses and violations of labor law. This absence of protection and power highlights. I'll start right here. This absence of protection and power highlights the need for the expansion of basic rights and protections to these workers, who help build wealth for so many others throughout the food system. You can see a picture here on the left. Farm workers like these shown harvesting tomatoes in Florida may resort to rudimentary and inadequate personal protection against pesticides and other airborne hazards. So they're wearing these masks because these fields are usually sprayed with pesticides. And this is a very, I'd say, rudimentary, basic at best, way to protect your breathing from chemicals that are being sprayed. And you can see these also has on these rubber gloves, which protects his hands, but then he's wearing what may be a cotton shirt, and it's probably wet because of the chemicals that are sprayed on the fields. All right, I'm over here in box 1. Actually, I'm going to finish this right here. So we'll go back up to here. I'm going to take off from here. This absence of protection and power highlights the needs for the expansion of basic rights and protections to these workers who help build wealth for so many others throughout the food system. Protections, throughout the food system. There we go. Protections have since been extended to some farm workers, but exceptions have been maintained. For example, at the federal level, the minimum wage has been extended to workers on large farms, but overtime pay has not. Small farms remain exempt from minimum wage requirements, meaning if you work on a small farm, you'll be lucky to make minimum wage. Over here, box 1, lack of data makes it harder to protect farm workers. Researchers face a lack of reliable and accessible public information about the lives and working conditions of farm workers. There are multiple reasons for the scarcity of good data. The informal, seasonal, and subcontracted nature of agricultural labor makes it difficult to count farm workers. Some surveys on occupational jury omit small farms with fewer than 11 employees. Undocumented farm workers and their employers may be reluctant to share information, and employers may refuse to allow access for researchers and surveyors. Workers with health concerns may not report their experiences due to lack of reporting systems, fear of retaliation, or failure to recognize symptoms. Thus, information about farm workers, including the number and rate of occupational injuries caused by pesticides and heat, is underreported. Researchers have estimated that U.S. government reports of occupational injuries in agriculture miss 79% of non-fatal injuries and 74% of deaths. The lack of accurate and complete data makes every aspect of research, education, and advocacy on farm workers issues more difficult. Okay, right here, farm workers at risk. Farm workers undertake some of the most challenging work: cultivating, harvesting, maintaining, packing, and planting fruits and vegetables, and handling livestock. Often, they work under grueling conditions. While farm workers face numerous threats to their health and safety, pesticides and heat stress conditions are among the most serious. Pesticide dependence puts farm workers' health and safety at risk. During the 20th century, through a combination of technological development, market forces, and policies, U.S. agriculture became overwhelmingly dependent on synthetic pesticides. The use of these toxic compounds to control fungi, insects, weeds, and other pests has become commonplace in intensive monoculture farming, a system in which single crop species are grown across vast areas of farmland, often year after year. The resulting diminished biodiversity creates ideal environments for insects and plant diseases to propagate, while exposed soils and extensive fertilizer use, also hallmarks of today's dominant agricultural system, create welcoming habitats for weeds. However, heavy reliance on pesticides is not the only option for dealing with agricultural pests. The science and practice of agroecology incorporates many alternative approaches to crop protection. Despite the existence of these alternatives, the area of farmland treated with pesticides increased 65% between 1997 and 2017. In 2017, farmers spent more than $17.5 billion on pesticides, $37 for every acre treated, up from $27 per acre in 1997. While intensive pesticide use has been an integral part of the strategy to increase yields per acre, it has had disastrous consequences for many communities and the environment. Farm workers and their families face both immediate and long-term harm from pesticides. Although data are limited, estimates suggest that thousands of workers suffer acute pesticide poisoning every year. Farm worker pesticide poisonings are likely to be more severe than pesticide poisonings that occur in other occupations. Considering all exposure cases, farm workers are twice as likely to suffer severe injury or death. Farm workers face risks of injury and death whether or not they are directly involved in handling pesticides, and field workers who are not working directly with pesticides account for the majority of reported poisonings. Many employers do not post adequate notices that fields have been sprayed with pesticides, fail to enforce no entry periods after spraying, fail to provide required protective gear and training on how to use it, or discourage the use of protective gear. The 2015-2016 National Agriculture Workers Survey indicated that only 57% of farm workers had received any safety training in the previous months. Chronic health issues from long-term exposure to pesticides are also an issue. Farm workers repeatedly endure exposure to pesticides through contact with airborne drift or through residues on equipment, soil, plants, or clothing. Farm workers' families are also exposed to pesticide residues when these are brought home on workers' bodies and clothes and shoes. Chronic pesticide exposure has been associated with devastating health issues, including cancer, depression, diabetes, neurodegenerative diseases, and reproductive issues. Some of these conditions are associated even with very low levels of exposure or over long periods. Heat stress conditions also threaten farm workers' health and safety. Over the past 30 years, exposure to extreme heat was, on average, the top cause of weather-related deaths in the United States. Between 1992 and 2017, heat was estimated to be responsible for an average 2,700 serious injuries and 30 deaths per year among all U.S. workers. Farm workers die of heat-related causes at roughly 20 times the rate of workers in all other civilian occupations. Farm workers die of heat-related causes at roughly 20 times the rate of workers in all other civilian occupations. Farm workers' high risk of heat stress is related to the nature of their labor. They do hard work under the sun and often through the hottest parts of the year. Direct sunlight can increase the heat index, which combines temperature and humidity to give a feels-like temperature by up to 15% or 15 degrees. So basically, sunlight can increase the feels-like temperature by up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Further, to protect against chemicals, including pesticides, insects, and sun, farm workers typically wear long sleeves and often wear multiple layers. Such clothing can add up to 12 degrees to the feels-like temperature. Non-breathable coveralls used to protect pesticide handlers against the most toxic pesticides can increase the feels-like temperature by even more, by up to 27 degrees Fahrenheit. Another factor that exacerbates heat injury is the way many farm workers are paid. When employers pay farm workers based on piece rate, the workers earn according to how much they harvest, and this disincentivizes taking breaks to rest, seek shade, or drink water. The Federal Occupation Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, endorses a set of clear heat stress prevention measures. Let me just scoot this over. Measures and remedies. These include allowing new workers time to acclimatize to hot conditions, providing additional hydration, rest, and shade as heat increases, and training workers and supervisors to recognize and respond to signs of heat stress. However, many employers fail to offer such remedies. In the absence of training, many farm workers are not aware of the critical importance of hydration and acclimatization. The confusion and impaired coordination that accompany heat stress can put workers and additional The confusion and impaired coordination that accompany heat stress can put workers at additional risk for other kinds of traumatic injury. Moreover, farm workers can face additional heat stress risks even outside of the work environment. Employer-provided housing often lacks air conditioning or fans, eliminating important overnight recovery time and, in some cases, meaning that farm workers start their day already experiencing heat stress. All of this is further compounded by the fact that the majority of farm workers do not have access to health insurance coverage or workers' compensation and are unlikely to receive care for heat-related or other injuries. Combined pesticide and their heat effects are worse than the sum of their parts. While pesticide exposure and heat stress conditions each already represents a threat to farm workers' health, climate change promises. Hang on, let's start right there. Right there. While pesticide exposure and heat stress conditions each already represent a threat to farm workers' health, climate change promises to compound these threats. For example, climate change is likely to increase pesticide use due to expanding ranges and impacts of pests and pathogens, increasing vigor of weeds compared with crops, and decreasing efficacy of pesticides under increasing temperatures. Higher temperatures also increase pesticide volatilization rates, meaning more of the pesticides applied will be lost as vapor, potentially leading to even higher application rates to achieve the same effect. So we'll get into that table in a few minutes. All right, I'm picking up from right here. Right there. Get that to work. Click. There you go. As the potential for exposure to pesticides increases, farm workers may also become more vulnerable to them. A growing body of research shows that heat stress increases the human body's susceptibility to pesticides and other toxicants, magnifying their potential for both acute and long-term health effects. In the case of widely used organophosphate pesticides, warmer temperatures have been shown to increase the rate of chemical transformation into more toxic compounds. Finally, the increasing use and toxicity of pesticides amplify the need for protective clothing, which can, as noted earlier, dramatically increase the risk of heat-related injury. So it's like one of those things where it's like snowballs rolls down a hill. It keeps getting bigger and bigger. So it's crazy. All right, so let's take a look at this data table here. I'm going to just kind of really quick shut myself off. There we go. All right, so you can see this. This is agricultural pesticide use and heat stress conditions in key agricultural states. And we're probably going to make some graphs out of something like this. So I'm going to take a look at this here. You're going to see farm workers statewide. So in California, Washington, and Florida, there's a large amount of let me turn on the key here, this thing here. All right, there are a ton of workers. These are the total farm workers. And in the top 10 counties, you're going to see a large amount. So then there's a large percentage. So we can actually figure out the percentage. So in the top 10 counties of, say, California, you could figure out the percentage of workers that are found in those areas. Here's about half, and here's about another half. Okay. Okay, so crop statewide sales, you can see that in the top 10 counties, you've got a very large amount of money, billions of dollars that are coming from those. Okay. Acres harvested, you can also see this here, so we'll probably work with that. In fact, I like that. We're probably going to do that. This is on page 6. I'm going to remember that. So we'll come back and we'll take a look at this data table a little bit more closely later. Let me go back. All right, mouse. Let's make that more interesting. All right, and then I'm going to turn that webcam back on if I can. Focus Classic. Huh. Maybe I can't. Maybe you don't get to see my face anymore. Lucky you. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump right up here to this area, risks for farm workers, a closer look in 3 states, right here. We aimed to assess how farm workers experience compounding threats from pesticides used and heat stress conditions. While dangerous heat is an issue for farm workers in every kind of agriculture, pesticide use is more concentrated in crop production than in animal agriculture. We therefore focused our attention on crop agriculture. Heat and pesticide use vary from state to state. We assessed 3 key states in depth: California, Florida, and Washington. That's that table we just looked at up above. We chose these states based on their high rates of pesticide use and the importance of agriculture, especially labor-intensive fruit, nut, and vegetable crops, to their economies. These states also have among the highest number of farm workers. For each state, we examined the intersection between risks of pesticide use and heat stress conditions, situating our analysis in the context of the state's agricultural economy and regulatory environment. Since agriculture and climate conditions are highly variable within any given state, we also identified the top 10 agricultural counties in each state and conducted a similar analysis focusing on just those counties. And then there's some appendices that you can take a look at. All right here, we calculated the average rate of pesticide use, kilogram per harvested cropland acre, at state and county levels, using estimates of agricultural applications in 2016 from the U.S. Geological Survey Pesticide National Synthesis Project, and acres of crops harvested from 2017 Census of Agriculture. To better understand the nature of acute and long-term health threats faced by farm workers, we also identified the top 10 pesticides used in labor-intensive agriculture in each state and assessed the risks associated with them. And that's a bunch of different tables, which we'll take a look at as we go through or after we're done reading. Right here. Finally, we used heat data from recent historical conditions, 1971 to 2000, based on the Union of Concerned Scientists report, Killer Heat in the United States, focusing on 214 days between April 1st through October 31st. As in that work, we used the heat index used by the National Weather Service, also known as the feels-like temperature, which accounts for both temperature and relative humidity. While susceptibility, here we go, right here. While susceptibility to heat risk is highly individual and dependent on many factors, National Weather Service guidance and other research suggests that a heat index above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, people exerting themselves or working outdoors become increasingly susceptible to heat illnesses or injury. So here is a graph of the health hazards of top pesticides used on labor-intensive crops in California. I needed a drink of water. Let's see here. Okay. I just want to make sure that I get this recorded. All right, so as you can see in this one, the colors are different. So listed as highly hazardous is this lighter color here. Listed as highly hazardous, this is for acute toxicity, okay? And this is listed as highly hazardous for long-term effects. This is listed by EPA for causing, they spelled causing wrong, causing injury or death via skin contact. So that's any kind of chemical that you get in contact with your own skin, which I think any one of these, this one, and this one are going to cause problems if you touch them because your body just absorbs things. And then this one here is falling into at least one of the above categories. So this one is something that fits any of these other two or more than one. Okay. I'm not sure if it's going to tell you exactly which ones, but it says the top 10 pesticides applied by weight in California, Florida, and Washington include several that are highly dangerous to human health, according to 3 key indicators. I believe those are the 3: acute toxicity, long-term effects, and injury or death via skin contact. Pesticides listed for acute toxicity, a broad range of symptoms, depending on the compound and the level of exposure. Keep it in mind, let me see if I can get this to scroll back over here. Pesticides listed for long-term health effects are known potential carcinogens, which is a cancer-causing agent. Endocrine disruptors are those things that go and they kind of disrupt your hormonal system. And then it says see methods for identifying and characterizing the pesticides in Technical Appendix 1 and see Table A3 of Technical Appendix 2 for detailed results of the analysis. So these analyses or these appendices are found at the end of this article, and there will be print copies available for you. Okay. Let me zoom out just a smidge because it keeps moving around on me. All right, so table 2 here is talking about acute health hazards of top pesticides used in Florida. So this actually tells you the different pesticides, for example, sulfur, dichloropropene, petroleum oil, metam, potassium, chloropicrin, glyphosate, kaolin clay, metam, copper hydroxide, petroleum distillate, calcium polysulfide, mancozeb, chlorothalonil, and then sulfuric acid, allyl isothiocyanate. So there's a lot of things here, and you can look at each one of these. Again, these will be available, but they are dangerous. I know that glyphosate is one that is commonly called Roundup, and many of you might know what that is, and a lot of people will use this to kill weeds in their own yards. So you can go to the store and just buy a big gallon of this and spray it as much as you want wherever. And what's interesting is they say that this one causes minor eye irritation, but there is building research that shows that glyphosate can cause long-term issues, and also can be considered one that causes injury via skin contact and is highly dangerous or hazardous for long-term effects. And that's probably going to be the same with a lot of these. Okay, so I'm going to be right up here at the top. It says, for farm workers, however, heat does not have to be extreme to be dangerous. The heat index used by the National Weather Service is calibrated for a healthy, hydrated, and unmedicated person who is 5'7" and 147 pounds, wears short sleeves, and does light work in the shade with a slight breeze. And there's your definition. With farm work, however, heat becomes dangerous at lower temperatures, including temperatures that probably feel quite comfortable for those of us who match the description listed above, doing light work in comfortable clothes in a shady, breezy area. A recent study identified a heat index of just 80 degrees as a critical threshold for outdoor workers, defining the lower end of the range in which 99% of injuries and 100% of deaths occur. Therefore, in this report, we used an 80-degree Fahrenheit heat index threshold. This threshold makes it clear that the season of risk for farm workers extends far beyond the very hottest part of the year. I'll just give you a quick story here. I used to work in conservation work, and we were out in some days where it was 110 degrees, and we were out in the sun, and we had to wear long sleeves. The good news is when I was doing a lot of my work, we were working in rivers, and so we were wet, which kept the temperature down. But there were days when we were well over that 80 degrees heat index threshold. And there were some days where we hit 110 degrees and it was muggy, and we just called it quits for the day because it was just too hot, because it's just not easy to stay hydrated and stay cool in those temperatures. So this threshold is quite interesting to me. All right, California. California leads the nation in total value of agricultural products sold, as well as in labor-intensive commodities such as fruits, nursery products, tree nuts, and vegetables. Fruit, tree nut, and vegetable production make up 84% of California's crop sales, more than any other state. Further, the state's crop production uses nearly 8 million acres. The 2017 Census of Agriculture estimated California's farm worker population to be 377,593. But as with other farm worker data, this may reflect significant underreporting. A recent analysis of California employment records estimates there are more than twice that number, which is around 829,000 workers. California's average rate of pesticide use on harvested croplands, 8.1 kilograms per acre, is more than 4.5 times the national average. Despite recent declines in statewide pesticide use, the pesticide injury, acute pesticide poisoning, remains a regular occurrence. Let me start back here. I think I said that wrong. Despite recent declines in statewide pesticide use and pesticide injury, acute pesticide poisoning remains a regular occurrence, with an average of 88 cases per year between 2010 and 2015. 9 of the top 10 pesticides used in California's labor-intensive crops have dire implications for farm workers' health. The Pesticide Action Network associates 6 with long-term health effects and 2 with acute toxicity. Long-term is meaning like over years, but acute means something that happens very quickly and on right at the time of happening, of being exposed. The Environmental Protection Agency lists 7 as causing injury or death through contact with the skin. California farm workers' risk of pesticide injury is compounded by the risk of heat stress conditions. From 1971 to 2000, the average number of days per year over the heat risk threshold of 80 degrees Fahrenheit stood at 102. Extreme heat, driven by climate change, is a mounting public health concern in California for much of the population, and especially those, I'm going to sit down here, like farm workers who must exert themselves outdoors. The situation in the state's leading agricultural counties is even more severe. The top 10 agricultural counties, which account for 67% of all crop sales and 60% of all harvested acres, have higher pesticide use rates than the state average, as well as more days with risk of heat injury, an average of 115 days per year between April and October from 1971 to 2000. In addition, cities such as Fresno, located in the agricultural-rich Central Valley region, have already seen an increase in the number of days with a high heat index since the 1970s. We're going to pause right there. That's page 10 I'm working on right now, but I just wanted to maybe make a quick jump back here. I believe these are the top 10 counties that you're looking at. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. There's 22 counties you're looking at here. But this is where most of the crop production, right here. Let me just turn on the... Let's go back to this. There we go. So these are the counties where you're going to see most of the crop production. And so they're going to be very, very important. You can see there's the past pesticide rate applications. Anything in a dark color, like this one here, are 25 to 50 kilograms per acre, which is really high. And these show you the days that are dangerous heat days per year. So if we go back up here, it was saying that 102. What they're saying here is that from 71 to 2000, the average number of days per year. So there's 102 days per year that on average that are over 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And so those people are working in extreme conditions where they're hotter, their pores are open, they're in contact with pesticides, okay? And their economic importance to the whole world, because they're feeding us as Americans here in America, they're feeding us. So their economic importance is super important. All right. But the problem is that these pesticides and this heat that's being caused or generated because of the increase in climate change are putting these workers at extreme risk. Oh, I found the webcam. There you go, you're back. All right, so we're going to just jump down here and finish up page 10. You can take a look at this picture here. If this is an 80-degree day and you're standing here in this, these suits are made up out of a substance called Tyvek. You sometimes see it around the outside of new houses being built. It's a good way to seal the house and keep it from getting a lot of cold air in. So these suits are very, very hot to be in. So consider that you're wearing basically a plastic suit with plastic gloves, with a face mask and goggles and a hood. And you're in 80-degree weather. You're standing out in this field and you're spraying chemicals. It's a recipe for disaster when you look at the amount of stress that they're under. All right, so this here is a picture of Washington State, and it's the same thing. You can go back. There'll be print copies of this, but you can go back and take a look at this. I'll even put the whole article so you can see the color pictures on Empower. But you're also seeing the same thing, the connections between dangerous heat days, application rates, and economic importance. So these areas are super important economically, okay? But the pesticides and the dangerous heat days coupled together are making it more dangerous for workers. So let's read about Washington now. Washington is a major producer of labor-intensive crops, ranking second in the nation for total crop sales for fruits, tree nuts, and vegetables. In terms of production, it ranks second in the nation for fruits and tree nuts, third for vegetables, and fifth for Christmas trees and short rotation woody crops. The Washington agricultural industry relies on 228,588 workers for its agriculture. Overall, Washington has the second highest number of farm workers in the nation after California. Washington's average pesticide application rate of 7.6 kilograms per harvested crop acre is 4.5 times the national average. 9 of the 10 most common pesticides applied to fruit, orchard crops, and vegetables have dire implications for farm worker health. PAN, which is the Pesticide Something Network, let's go back up here real quick. Pesticide Action Network, that's what PAN is. So they track pesticide use. PAN, right here, associates six with long-term health effects, and the EPA lists 8 as causing injury or death through contact with the skin. Farther north and cooler than California and Florida, Washington has historically averaged only 31 days with risk of heat-related injuries. That's 31 days a year. It's a little bit better between October and April and October. However, conditions have been worsening. The Pacific Northwest today is on average, and I'm just going to finish this section, more than 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it was during the first half of the 20th century. Average summer temperatures in Washington have increased by about 0.6 degrees Fahrenheit since 1970, though the increase has been as much as 1 degree Fahrenheit for many Washington locations in that time frame. In Washington's top 10 agricultural counties, pesticide use rates are higher than the statewide average, with a rate of 11.1 kilograms per acre, or 6.5 times the national average. The number of days with a high risk of heat-related injuries has also been higher in these counties, averaging 42 days per year between 1970 and 2000. We'll pick up with Florida on the next file. So there's a lot of information here, a lot going on. In the next file, the last 10 pages actually goes over some of the things that they're recommending to make life better for farm workers. And so that's going to be a real important one for you to take a look at. All right, we'll see you then.